Bees had been living in this backyard shed for at least 2 years. The landlord wanted to call an exterminator, but the family who lived here wanted to save the bees, so they called me. When I lifted up the floor, I found a huge hive full of gentle bees. The hive was so big I had to remove another section of floor to access the entire thing. Then I started removing the hive. Whatever I removed from the original hive went right into the new one so the bees would have everything they need to survive. After I removed all of the comb, I started scooping bees into the new hive. As soon as I put the bees by the new hive, they marched right in. Then a stream of bees began running out from under the floor into the new hive. So I waited and watched to see if I could spot the queen bee in the crowd. After about 15 minutes, she appeared, so I put her in a clip to keep her safe. Once the queen was in the new hive, some bees began sending signals to help the other bees find their way home. I left the hive overnight, and by the next day, the entire colony was in their new home, and it was another great day of saving the bees. A small swarm of bees had gathered on this tennis court, and I was called to remove them. But once I got there, I realized this colony was in more trouble than it seemed. Their queen was dead, and because the bees were so loyal to their queen, they refused to leave her behind. They were still trying to attend to her and take care of her little bee body, so I put the queen's body in the new hive. It took the bees a few minutes to realize she had moved, but once they found her, they rushed to her and started to care for her in the new hive. So I waited for all the bees to get into their new hive, but since this colony was so small already, they needed more than a new queen to survive. They needed to join a new colony. So once I got the bees home, I put them in a standard beehive box, but I couldn't just put them with another colony and a new queen right away, or that could cause confusion, chaos, and fighting among the bees. So I put a layer of newspaper between them. The newspaper would keep the colony safe and separated while the bees got used to each other's scents. So I closed up the hive. When I checked on the bees a few days later, the bees had chewed through the newspaper, and the two colonies had merged together to become one, and it was another great day of saving the bees. Bees were living in these drawers, and I was called to give them a new home, so I started to carefully remove each piece of their hive. These bees had worked hard to build all of this comb, so whatever I took out of the drawers, I put into a new hive for the bees. Then it was time to get the bees into the new hive, so I just shook the bees out of the drawer and into their new home. But these drawers were full of more bees than I expected, so I just kept shaking drawer after drawer of bees into the new hive, and after all of the drawers were empty, I started scooping bees up with my hands. These bees did not feel threatened by me, so they were not trying to sting me at all. And after I had scooped most of the bees into the new hive, I found the queen. So I put her in a clip and I put her in the new hive. Then I gave the rest of the bees some smoke, and they all started running after their queen, and the entire colony moved into the new hive, and it was another great day of saving the bees. Bees were living in this trash bin, and I was called to remove them. At first, I only saw one piece of comb. It was full of food and baby bees, which the bees worked very hard for, so I put the comb into the new hive. Then I saw more bees at the bottom of the bin, so I took out the trash and some bees along with it, and I found the rest of the hive. Then I removed all of the comb from the trash bin, and I put it into frames. Some bees were gathering on the outside of the bin, so I started scooping them into the new hive, and in the very first handful of bees I scooped, I found the queen, so I put her in a clip and I put her in the new hive. These bees were very gentle and were not trying to sting me, so I just kept scooping them off the side of the bin. Once I had enough bees in the new hive with their queen, they started telling the other bees where to go. All of a sudden, bees started running out of the trash bin and into their new hive. I waited for the bees to get in their new hive, then I took them home, and it was another great day of saving the bees. This cooler was full of bees, so I started carefully removing each piece of the hive. I saved all of the bees' hard work for them to use in their new home. Then I started scooping up bees while searching for the queen. These bees were very gentle and they were not trying to sting me, so I just kept scooping up bees, and all of a sudden I found the queen on the side of the cooler. I put her in a clip to keep her safe, and I placed her in the new hive. Then I shook the rest of the bees out of the cooler and into the new hive so they could be with their queen. I finished removing the comb from the cooler and I put the cover on the new hive. But then I noticed that all of the bees were flying out of the new hive and swarming all around me. It was a race between me and the bees. I had to figure out a way to get them back in the new hive. So I made sure the queen was still in the clip and I waited to see where the bees were going. They were flying straight towards a tree in the backyard. So I chased after the swarm of bees while carrying the queen. The swarm was just out of my reach, so I used the queen to guide the colony back to the new hive. Then I put the queen into the new hive and I shook the swarm of bees off the tree. I waited for them to settle back into the new hive with their queen, and it was another great day of saving the bees. Bees were living in this box and I was called to remove them, so I carefully lifted the lid and inside I found a giant hive. So I gave the bees some smoke and I started removing the comb, but the first piece fell to the ground and because I tried to catch it, I got stung by a bee who was on the comb. So I removed the stinger from my skin and I got right back to work removing the hive. These bees had a ton of nectar, so I helped myself to a small bite of fresh honey and it was warm and delicious. I saved all of the comb from the original hive for the bees to use in their new home. And after I was done removing all of the comb, it was time to get the bees into the new hive, so I started scooping them up with my hands. With every handful of bees I scooped, I was searching for the queen, but there were still a lot of bees hiding inside the box, so I took the lid off of the box, and all of a sudden, I saw the queen. So I put her in a clip to keep her safe, and I put her into the new hive. Then I used my smoker to guide the rest of the bees off the lid and into their new home. But there were so many bees that some were hanging off the bottom of the new hive. So I added more room to the hive and I scooped the bees into their new home. I waited for the bees to settle into the new hive. Then I took them home and it was another great day of saving the bees. This suitcase was full of bees, so I opened it up and I found a beautiful old hive. This hive didn't have any food or brood, but it did have a lot of bees who were very gentle unless you were a threat to the colony like this wasp. I watched as the bees defended their colony and eliminated the wasp. Then I picked up the suitcase full of bees, I loaded it into my truck, and I took the bees home with me. Then it was time to move the bees out of the suitcase and into the new hive. So I gave the bees some smoke and they all started to leave the suitcase and march into the new hive because they knew it was a better place for them to live. So I waited and watched to see if I could find the queen bee in the crowd. And when most of the bees were out of the suitcase, all of a sudden I saw the queen bee walking into the new hive. So I gave the rest of the bees some smoke, and the entire colony moved out of the suitcase and into the new hive, and it was another great day of saving the bees. Bees were living in the wall of this house, and I was called to give the bees a new home. So I opened up the wall, and inside I found a giant hive full of very gentle bees. And to my surprise, almost immediately, I found the queen. I was really excited since this hardly ever happens in a hive this big. So I put the queen in a clip to keep her safe, and I put her into the new hive. Then I started to remove each piece of comb. It looked like this queen had been very busy lately because this hive was packed full of baby bees. All of these little white larvae would eventually turn into baby bees, and saving these pieces of comb is one of the most important parts of the bee removal process. So I just kept removing each piece of the hive, and whatever I removed from the original hive, I saved for the bees to have in their new home. These bees had everything they needed to survive, and they had a ton of honey. I had been working for about 2 hours by now, so I helped myself to a bite of honey, and it was delicious. But after I was done removing all of the comb from the wall, I still had to help get the bees into the new hive, so I started scooping them up with my hands. But there were so many bees that I decided to build a little bee bridge, and pretty soon all of the bees started to rush over the bee bridge and into the new hive to be with their queen. So I gave the rest of the bees some smoke, and I waited for them to get into the new hive. Then I closed up the hive, I took the bees home, and it was another great day of saving the bees.